This is Paul Schrader. It's November 2nd, 2000. I'm in my office here in Times Square. There's a lot of noise around us. There's a big NASDAQ sign right there, and there is a TV studio right there, which appeals to the rock generation, which I can't name. And they tend to make noise, and there are sirens going around, plus the fact that I have a fever and I'm absolutely exhausted. Apart from that, I'm very happy to be with you, and we'll try to talk a little bit about cat people.
I've waited a long time for you. Without me. And I can't escape without you.
I'm not like you.
Oh, yes, you are.
I had begun as a film critic and then as a screenwriter. Sold my first script in '73. And then by '76, I was directing Blue Collar, Hardcore, and American Gigolo was the first film I did that was financially successful. Subsequent to American Gigolo, I was offered scripts I didn't write, and I would be interesting to do something that I didn't originate and that wasn't, to my mind, terribly personal. To do something that continued along the lines of the aesthetics I was moving into, which started with American Gigolo and my friendship with Ferdinando Scarfiotti. And I wanted to get Nando and John Bailey back together again, and this time we would do this sort of classy kind of horror film and work on my control of the visual language. To be the production designer. He was in fact the production designer. And under him, all the visual departments fell. And often it would cause a little friction on the set because, you know, he was quite aristocratic and had Italian accent, homosexual, and he would just walk onto the set and as if it was his set, because it was his set. I even tried to have the film titled a film by Paul Schrader and Ferdinando Scarfiotti, but that was blocked by either the guild or the studio, I'm not sure, in terms of a precedent. So that it took my crew a few weeks to understand that this particular production designer had power and influence beyond the norm. So after he came to the U.S. to do American Gigolo, we became very good friends, and there was a whole group of people who associated around his house on Miller Drive and would go there on the weekends. So I was very anxious to keep this collaboration alive and this friendship alive. So when I was offered Cat People, basically I said, I'll do it if John and Nando will do it with me. And so, you know, that became a large part of my incentive. I know that a lot of people thought a lot of the first film. Scorsese likes it a lot. It never really meant a lot to me, and it wasn't really part of my upbringing or my background. So I had no real memories of the film. You know, it was considered to be quite daring because of its use of shadow and evoking suspense. But I didn't feel that I was remaking that film. I felt I was doing this other thing, which is more Jungian thing. And I was surprised when Cat People came out, the number of critics that tried to compare the two. And I did feel at the time that if I had just been smart enough to change the title, I could have been spared all that grief of having been beat over the head with the previous film, because I don't think people would have really compared them much if I hadn't, you know, if it hadn't been an official universal remake. Taking a woman and putting her on a pedestal.
Listen, Irena, I'm not gonna let you go.
I've joked from time to time that with women says that they don't need to be on a pedestal because I'll bring my own. And so that was a sort of the way I, in my background, kind of dealt with my fear of women, was to put who sweeps him away and becomes that mixture of the sacred and the profane at the same time. A not dissimilar thing happened with myself and Nostalgia, you know, in that she sort of invaded my life and threw it askew for a period of time, not without my complicity, of course. Brits with stage experience, when they have a role that's a little bigger than life, because I don't know why, but somehow the American movie-going public seems to accept this kind of over-the-top exposition better from Brits than they do from our own actors, because of the cast, but also because it's in a zoo. So I think we used 2 or 3 different animal outfits. When you work with big cats, you know, it's kind of a luxury in a way, because if they don't want to work, that's that. You know, there's nobody to complain to. You don't have to call up their agent or yell. You know, they don't want to work today, and so you always have a number of cats standing by. And sometimes you go through 2 or 3 cats, and none of them want to work. Then you have to do something else. And because leopards are nocturnal and arboreal, they're very, very hard to train, impossible to train. What they basically want to do is they want to be up high somewhere in the dark, and movies aren't made up high somewhere in the dark. Mountain lions, on the other hand, you know, are California creatures, desert creatures. And so they are trainable, and we would dye them black. Then each one had its own thing they would do. Some would stand and roar. Each were trained to do one task. And then the leopards we use only in secure environments, so that lions don't have, that leopards have. And leopards, how will I know if something goes wrong? And he said, well, you'll see me running. And we had all of that normal stuff when we weren't supposed to bring children on the set, because children make the big cats very aggravated because they see them as some sort of rumaki. And like all predatory animals, they want to pounce on the weak. Women on the crew were not allowed to work during their periods, because that would throw the cats off. The cats would be very, very unsettled and hard to do what they are instructed to do if they could smell that. So it was a different working environment, and it was a nice combination. I thought it was sort of original, and the credits ended up being those 2 colors. And then the other things that Nando liked to do was the grays and blues with a big splash of red. He did that a fair amount too. Yeah, it was very design oriented. I remember one day at Daly's, we're sitting there and Nando said, who moved the bureau? And I said, no, nobody moved the bureau. I said, yes, they moved it. We went from Daly's over to the stage, and he had marked exactly where the bureau was supposed to sit. It had been moved and moved back by the crew, you know, as you do when you shoot, but it fell 3 inches short of the mark. And he was watching the image, and he said, who, you know, boom, who moved the bureau? So it was kind of nice having the sort of fashion and decor police on the set. There's a famous surrealist painting from the 1920s of a leopard woman, of a leopard body and a woman's head, and a man standing next to her. And Scarfiani wanted to replicate that painting in the dream sequence, which we did, and for the woman we used Nostalgia's mother. And she looks at the woman and says, mother. Unfortunately, after we shot it and people saw it, it sort of stuck out as being just too, I don't know whether it was too fake or too something, but it threw people the wrong way. So we ended up with just Malcolm and the leopard. All part of my life, including a marriage and some other personal problems. And it all ended up with me going off to Japan to make Mishima. And by the time I came back from Japan, the industry had changed. So although I began in the studio system and made the first 4 films in the studio system, by the time I returned in the late 80s, the kinds of films I were making were now independent. And all the films I've made since then were independent films. So Cat People was my sort of last foray in that old Hollywood kind of system where you had the money and the time to build the sets.
you.